More than 500,000 people have fled their homes in Myanmar's Rakhine province since August 2017. On Tuesday, Bob Rae, Canada's special envoy to Myanmar, released his report on the crisis facing the Rohingya people. Joining us now, as he has periodically throughout these incidents and these times, is Farid Khan. He's the Director of Advocacy and Media Relations for the Rohingya Human Rights Network. Mr. Khan, thank you very much for making some time and rejoining us. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you for discussing this subject again.
Well, thanks for coming back. We always appreciate your insights. Now, before we get into the report itself, can you remind us of the scale of the humanitarian crisis that we're dealing with here?
Yes, we are talking about almost actually 700,000 people who've been forced out of Myanmar, Rohingya, who've been forced out of Myanmar, about 375 villages that have been completely destroyed, and the Myanmar government is in the process of going even further by bulldozing those sites so that evidence can be covered up of the atrocities. We're talking about up to 75,000 women, and these are numbers as of December, 75,000 women who are pregnant as a result of mass rape. Over 60% of the refugees are women and children. Roughly 60% are under the age of 18. Something on the order of 50,000 orphans who are children. And between, the number is not exact because obviously there's been no access, but somewhere between 45 to maybe 60, 70,000 people who were killed.
Now, I'm curious as to your reaction to Bob Rae's report, if you haven't had a chance to look it over and, just sort of break it down. Anything that you liked about the report that you agree with?
Well, it's not perfect. However, it is a very solid foundation for Canada to take action in this crisis. I am particularly pleased about one thing, and that is the specific mention in the report of bringing to justice people who have perpetrated crimes against humanity and what he has called the possibility of genocide, but other agencies and human rights groups have definitely classified as genocide. That is a huge step forward because back in the fall there was no desire to mention the word genocide when these issues were being discussed. In addition, we're very pleased with the fact that he calls for Canada to take leadership on the international stage. During one of his interviews, he said that Bob Rae said that we're living in a world without adult supervision. Well, you know what? It's time for Canada to step up and be one of the adults on the international stage. And in addition, we're very pleased with his recommendation that Canada take a long-term approach and to commit $600 million over 4 years to address the crisis in this region. And one of the reasons that is probably one of the more important issues is because these crises that happen in other parts of the world, people think, well, that's over there, we shouldn't be worried about it. But the problem over there becomes the problem over here if the issues and what the basis of those problems are not addressed by the international community. And Canada is being a leader on the international stage as a nation that has spoken about its commitment to human rights, rule of law, and certainly standing up for that the values that Canadians believe in should be a nation that should be speaking out and taking leadership on this issue.
Oh, so the report sounds like there's some promising, that's a good start and it's promising in a lot of ways, but you mentioned previously that it's not perfect, so what might they have missed out on, what might have been overlooked?
Well, I know that this is not going to make a huge difference in terms of the impact on the Rohingya, but the fact that Aung San Suu Kyi still retains honorary Canadian citizenship sticks with a lot of people. This person who Bob Rae said is not above reproach, and the Human Rights Commissioner for the UN has said could be charged with crimes against humanity and genocide for complicity in those actions. The fact that she remains an honorary Canadian is something that I think hundreds of thousands of Canadians find galling. But that aside, if there's not going to be any change in her status in that regard, then we have Canadian law that allows Canada to charge Canadians under the Canadian Crimes Against Humanity and War Crimes Act. So there's that thing. So Bob Rae made no mention of her in his report, although he did respond to questions from reporters in his presentation. In addition, there was no reference with respect to the UN Protocol of Responsibility to Protect, which we have been advocates have been calling for the government to take action on. So those are two of the. Oh, and there's a third thing. There was no reference to an arms embargo on Myanmar to prevent the regime from getting more weapons, which they are using against their own people.
What is your hope? What are you hoping for with your petition and the impact that it can have, along with Bob Rae's report? What's the best case scenario?
Well, the petition is now almost 50,000 signatures, and I think that speaks to the desire for Canadians, for the government to take action. And the petition actually, while the focus has been on the honorary citizenship for Aung San Suu Kyi, the petition also called for a number of the things that I mentioned, that for Canada to take leadership, to work with international agencies and allies, to impose the arms embargo. So there are more substantive issues with that petition. However, the petition is basically a reflection of what Canadians want our government to do. And now that this report has been issued, of course, we were very disappointed that rather than taking action back in the fall, the Prime Minister decided to take this route, because we saw it as a delay on taking action to help the people who are facing a very, very dire situation. Not only the refugees in the camps in Bangladesh, but those Rohingya who remain in Myanmar, who we don't know what is happening with them. But recent reports over the last couple of months have indicated that the government of Myanmar is using starvation to try and force them out now. And we're hoping that, or we're calling on the Canadian government, now that the report has been issued, to implement these recommendations very quickly. Mr. Rae made the point that he did not come up with 100 recommendations because he wanted to be realistic in what the Canadian government could do, so he limited the number of recommendations, and I think that's a very realistic approach, and now that the government has this report in hand, we would like the government to act on it quickly.
Right, so they've got this report. Where is it that the Canadian government needs to put its efforts? What's the most important priority in your mind?
Well, I think the three of the things I mentioned is to take leadership on the international stage, to gather with the other nations who are dealing on this issue, and to become a leader on the international stage on this issue. This is the most persecuted minority in the world. They've been designated that by the UN. UN High Commissioner for Refugees and Human Rights have indicated in previous statements that crimes against humanity have been committed, that possible genocide has been committed by the Myanmar government. So number one is for the Canadian government to take leadership on this issue on the international stage. Number two is to implement the plan with regard to the humanitarian aid, and to put that forward quickly. I think that was a very important issue, because we've got with the almost 700,000 Rohingya who fled Myanmar in the last 7 months, we've got almost 1.3 million Rohingya living in refugee camps in Bangladesh right now. So that's another issue, is to deal on the humanitarian aid side of things. And the third thing is to try and work with the UN as well as the International Criminal Court to find ways to collect evidence to bring the perpetrators of the crimes and the atrocities to justice, because the aid is fine, working with other partners is fine, but there has to be justice for those who have been killed and those who have been who have suffered as a result of actions by the Myanmar government.
If any of our listeners want to get more information or want to get involved with the petition, how do they do that? They
can go to change.org, where the petition is still open for signatures. We are just short of 50,000, so if we can top 50,000 and add a lot more on top of that, that would be great. Updates will be posted on that website. My name, Fareed Khan, is attached to the petition. So you can look under change.org under my name, and you'll come and find that petition. And of course, myself as an individual, as well as the people I've been working with, the Rohingya Human Rights Network, we're going to continue to try and pressure the government to take quick action on this report. So we call on those people who would like some justice for the Rohingya to call their MPs' offices, email their MPs, email the Prime Minister's office to take quick action on this. We've waited 7 months. Tens of thousands of people have been killed. Women, children, women have been gang raped. I mean, the atrocities are things that we can't imagine in the lives that we live here in Canada, and these people deserve justice.
Mr. Khan, we always appreciate having you on the program. Thank you very much for spending a little time with us this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
Have a great day. Fareed Khan is the Director of Advocacy and Media Relations for the Rohingya Human Rights Network. He's also the sponsor of a petition to revoke the honorary citizenship that was granted to Aung San Suu Kyi.